Thanks a lot for inviting me to this important event. I think the theme of this conference is indeed very topical. After having been at it for decades without much success to show, we do really need more urgently than ever a grand, and may I also add bold, strategy towards the two-state solution. I hope that the discussion today can provide some much-needed input and momentum towards that goal. The European Union, for its part, remains committed to a negotiated two-state solution as the only way to achieve enduring peace that meets not just Israel's security needs, but its aspirations to thrive as a Jewish and democratic state, an aspiration which the citizens of Israel share with me wherever I travel throughout this country. And it must meet the Palestinian aspirations too, for statehood and sovereignty, an end to the 49-year-old occupation, and the resolution of all final status issues. This outcome is not solely in the long-term interest of the two parties, but also in that of the EU and the wider region. A two-state solution should ideally, of course, be negotiated directly between the two parties. Unfortunately, experience over the past many years has taught us that by just sitting Israel and Palestinians at a negotiation table, which is sometimes, or most of the time, even hard to achieve in itself, there is a block on the way to finding an agreement. Experience has shown the need for an honest broker and for a set of guidelines, ground rules, or parameters, call it what you want, to start the process. This is, of course, not a question of the international community or anyone else for that matter trying to be prescriptive or impose a solution on the parties the way it's sometimes reflected here. We, from the side of the EU, and I trust many others, can agree to anything that the two parties have freely agreed on themselves. But the point remains that the parties themselves have not been able to agree on a way forward on their own. The broad parameters for a two-state solution are well known, I think. Two states for two peoples living side by side, an Israeli state behind secure borders next to an independent, democratic, and contiguous state of Palestine based on 67 lines with mutually agreed swaps, Jerusalem as a future shared capital of two states, and a just and realistic settlement of the refugee question. While the political leaders, including President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and a majority of their publics on both sides express their support for a two-state vision, both Israel and the Palestinians are on a daily basis undertaking action that are undermining this very same vision. Through terror, violence, incitement, settlement building, and demolitions. Looking ahead, the stalemate in the peace process, the lack of a peace process, can only lead to more violence. There's of course no excuse for terror, incitement, and violence, and it must all end. But we have seen violence return time and again, and my heart goes out to all those who have suffered in the wave of terrorism and violence over the past years. The EU has repeatedly encouraged political leaders on the two sides to emerge from the current impasse and to show leadership. I know this is an easy thing to say, and of course showing leadership is much more difficult when the situation gets tough. But that is also exactly when leadership is most needed. And particularly at a time of regional turmoil, we all have an interest in not inflaming a national conflict into a religious one, as President Rivlin and many others have warned. The international community, and certainly the European Union, will stand by Israel in this respect. We all welcome the reduction in violence over the past month, but we must not lose sight of the underlying causes of tension what the High Representative, Mrs. Mogherini, has referred to as, and I quote, the frustrations, the sense of insecurity, and the lack of hope, and the lack of political horizon, end of quote. Because without a political horizon, de-escalation will be limited in time, and we will go back again and again to the cycle of violence. So what needs to happen now? Our first priority must be to build the conditions for final status talks based on mutual steps. For this to happen, we need significant policy shifts on the ground, and we need these policy shifts to happen in line with past agreements, which need to be fully respected and implemented. We have to find an entry point to see a political process restarting. But you know, I know, we all know that negotiations for negotiation's sake will not bring any substantive change on the ground unless we in parallel create the real conditions for people to live in security and dignity. This is an area where the clarity of the recent Quartet report speaks for itself. While settlements have continued to grow, there has been a near complete cessation of issuance of approvals for private Palestinian development of construction in Area C. In fact, only one permit for Palestinian housing construction in Area C was reportedly approved in 2014, and there do not appear to have been a single one in 2015. Palestinian development is also constrained by complex physical and administrative restrictions on the movement of people and goods. These restrictions, and I quote from the Quartet report, amplify the humiliation of living under military occupation and frustrate many aspects of Palestinian daily life, including going to school, seeking medical attention, or attending family gatherings, end of quote. Of course, the Palestinians have a crucial role to play as well as agents of change. Indeed, the Quartet report call on each side to independently demonstrate their commitment to this process, addressing the 10 recommendations set out in the report. The Quartet has called upon the Palestinian Authority to act decisively and take all steps within its capacity to cease incitement to violence and strengthen ongoing efforts to combat terrorism, including by clearly condemning all acts of terrorism. But measures can be taken which help the Palestinians take control over their lives while upholding Israel's security. In this context, I commend Israel for a number of recent positive steps, notably agreements reached or being finalized on electricity, telecommunications, postal services, and water supplies. There is, of course, much more to be done, and we hope to see that these agreements will be fully implemented by both sides, but these are key elements the parties can work on in parallel with the support of the European Union and the rest of the international community. Since September last year, High Representative Mogherini has invested in the Quartet as the format for international backing of such efforts. The regional context remains tense, of course. We do not want to see an old conflict such as this one mix with a new crisis in the neighboring countries. But just like Prime Minister Netanyahu, we also see opportunities for positive engagement with pragmatic countries in the region. One of the initiatives the High Representative has also taken has been to invite some of these Arab countries to join specific Quartet meetings. And the Quartet envoys have engaged together in Amman, Cairo, and Riyadh. Mrs. Mogherini, addressing the European Parliament, stressed the relevance of Saudi Arabia relaunching the Arab Peace Initiative and adapting it to the times. Only in a renewed regional framework is peace possible, she said. As is perfectly clear, there's obviously a good deal of common ground underneath all of our efforts, whether those of the EU, the Quartet, and, judging by Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements, the current Israeli government. What I think is missing is some sort of positive transactional logic. How do we each play our cards, if you like, in a way which will take the process forward? Looking at the role of the international community, we all have something to offer. I heard the Prime Minister at the opening of Knesset speaking of 38 billion reasons to believe that Israel's relations with the United States are stronger than ever and shall remain so. I can't match that, but there are 500 million reasons to believe that Israel's relations with the European Union are stronger than ever and shall remain so. That is the population of your biggest market, and if I may say so, your second closest ally. But I think I can afford to be a bit self-critical too, at least at this conference. The European Union has made an open, generous, and unprecedented offer of a special privileged partnership with Israel in the event of a two-state solution's realization. But Israelis sometimes tell me that makes the EU a bit of an all-or-nothing partner with a certain cap on the ambitions of our relationship now, but promising the earth when the conflict is resolved. How do we insert something substantial in policy terms into that gap? Something which could potentially serve to match steps from others, not least our Arab partners. The Arab Peace Initiative remains a goal worth pursuing. The EU has been crystal clear about its willingness to engage further with regional partners on the basis of that initiative, which we believe provides key elements for the settlement of the conflict, as well as the opportunity for building a regional security framework. But it should also be clear that whilst we support the Arab Peace Initiative and would like to foster regional integration, the idea that this would change the parameters for a two-state solution with which I began is a pipe dream. Security cooperation can support the building of trust, but it cannot replace the political realization of a two-state solution. So we all have something to offer, the US, the EU, and the regional partners. The challenge is perhaps rather how to bring these elements together to provide collective positive support from outside for genuine efforts on the ground by both parties acting in good faith. Not so much a carrots and stick policy, one might say, but a carrots and carrots policy. I thank you very much for your attention.